There aren't that many films that look at the art world, or I suppose some of the more eccentric characters in the art world, and bring them to the screen in a feature film. However, our guest today on the CineCity podcast, Duncan Ward's feature debut, Boogie Woogie, does exactly that. We're very pleased to have Boogie Woogie playing at the Duke of York's on the 3rd of December at 6:30pm, and also extra pleased that Duncan can join us today on the podcast to talk a little bit about the film. Welcome to the CineCity podcast, Duncan.
Thanks very much.
I mentioned there in the intro that Boogie Woogie is your debut feature, and so just so that people can get a feel for you and your work today, what is it that you've been up to, I suppose, up until this point?
I've been typically ecliptical type of filmmaker. I've made several films on sort of obscure things, but mainly portraits on artists, things like following Tadeusz Kantor, who's a Polish theatre director around for 6 years in the 80s, and making a film on Brian Eno in the late 80s, and another artist in the early 90s, and then a long-winded exercise, which is yet to finish, called Art and Space, and I've done part 1 and 2 of that. But mainly esoteric films prior to this, and, then commercials.
Yeah. A lot of those early works have been documentary-based, and so what was it that made you want to step out of your background in documentary and, as you said, commercials, to create Boogie Woogie?
It's a journey I took ages ago, wanting to do features, but I went via theatre. So I wrote and produced and directed a few plays, which I staged in a kind of clandestine way across London at various times. And that introduced me to working with actors, which I sort of enjoyed. And the progression was then to go and make a feature. But, to acquire the experience of working hands-on with actors. And theatre is far more suited to that than sort of spending years trying to get a film off the ground.
Yeah. And so for, the majority of our audience, who I'm sure, unless they happen to have been at Edinburgh, haven't actually seen the film, could you give us an idea as to what Boogie Woogie is about and its particular take on the art world?
Well, I wanted to, initially, when I was asked to write a few words, almost like a tagline, what it was, and I came up with the idea that things like, were you the last to know that your best friend was sleeping with your wife, and how many people will it take to stab you in the back before you twig, things like that. And the art world is a curiously vivacious, vibrant, vicious environment that is sort of held down, pinned together by a kind of elegant extremism. So it makes for quite a nice black satire in some respects, and an interesting microcosmic model of the world around greed and avarice and ambition. And I attempted to make a film that's really more a document than a blown-out sort of cartoon of the thing, if you like.
Boogie Woogie, I should say, its roots come from the book that was written by Danny Moynihan, who also penned the script. So at what point did you become involved with the project? Had Danny already turned it into
I was right involved right at the beginning, right from penning the script with him. As a director, overseeing practically everything in it, primarily structural, editorial, character development, and so forth. Of course, it's an interesting mix when you take on the author of the novel, who's not done a film before either, so you end up spending quite a bit of time haggling. But we got there in the end, so to speak. The kind of temperament is that over the last 10, 15 years, you've obviously had the whole sort of Brit art movement, greater awareness in the press. There's more column inches on art than any time prior to the mid-90s in English press. So it's no longer as elitist as it used to be. It gets to the red tops. People know Damien Hirst, he's a brand name almost. So that it's not too left field in terms of a subject matter to attempt, because you have films like Network, a 70s movie that deals with the insides of TV stations, Sweet Smell of Success, it deals with press and PR. And they're all kind of quite grotesque characters, made viewable and watchable because they're sort of repellent and kind of attractive at the same time. And the Boogie characters are all of that.
One of the major changes from the original novel is that the original novel was set in, the 1990s New York art world, but for Boogie Woogie the film, it's been transported to London. At what stage did that happen? Was that always the intention to set the film in London, and what was behind that decision?
Initially not. I mean, I basically fought for that decision because, London had become the epicenter of the auctions, and it was running pretty much head-to-head with New York in terms of artists and sales and things like that. So there was no big... Doing it in New York would have put the film in the mid-90s, if you like. Mm-hmm. Bringing it to London, it was very, very relevant for today. I mean, you have things like the Art Freeze, which is the most successful art festival annually, apart from Basel Art Fair. So bringing it to London just contemporized the thing and allowed us not to have to look back, apart from the fact that there was a lot of production value to be had out of it.
One of the things that gets brought up quite a lot when the film is mentioned in articles is this eclectic cast that you've got. You've got Christopher Lee in there with Charlotte Rampling and Jamie Winston and Gillian Anderson. And so how did you go about bringing that cast together? And it is definitely a mix of these kind of, I suppose, really well-known, seasoned names with some, newer actors as well.
Yeah, no, it's very Celestine how a lot of these things happen. I mean, independent filmmaking is